September 6, 1976, Hakodate Airport, on the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido. A Soviet fighter that Western intelligence had been terrified of for nearly a decade comes screaming in low over the runway, lands hot, overruns the pavement, and comes to a stop with its nose gear in the dirt. A Soviet lieutenant named Viktor Belenko climbs out, fires a warning shot into the air, and defects. Within days, American and Japanese engineers were crawling over the most feared interceptor in the Soviet inventory. What they found humiliated a decade of Western intelligence estimates, but not in the direction anyone expected. The aircraft was largely made of steel, not titanium, not exotic alloy, but nickel steel, welded together by hand. Its electronics were built around vacuum tubes, a technology the West considered obsolete. Its radar was crude by American standards, though brutally powerful. Its wings, which analysts had assumed indicated a highly maneuverable air superiority fighter, turned out to be sized for one thing only: lifting an enormous, heavy airframe to extreme altitude in a straight line. The Western verdict was swift and dismissive. The thing was primitive. It could not turn. It could not fight. Its engines would eat themselves alive if pushed to their maximum speed. It was, analysts concluded, a crude brute built by an industry that could not manage the metallurgy the Americans had mastered years earlier. Its designation was the MiG-25, NATO reporting name Foxbat, and less than a year after Belenko handed one to the West, the same allegedly primitive design set an absolute world altitude record that no aircraft has ever beaten. To understand why the MiG-25 existed, you have to understand what the Soviet Union was afraid of in the late 1950s and early 1960s. The United States was developing aircraft that could fly higher and faster than anything Soviet air defenses could reach. The XB-70 Valkyrie bomber program envisioned a machine cruising above 70,000 feet at 3 times the speed of sound. The Lockheed A-12 and later the SR-71 were being built to overfly Soviet territory at speeds and altitudes that made interception a mathematical impossibility for existing fighters. Soviet air defense doctrine had one answer to that: build an interceptor that could climb faster and reach higher than anything on Earth, get it into a firing position guided from the ground, and shoot. That single requirement dictated everything about the aircraft that resulted. It did not need to dogfight, because it would never see a dogfight. It did not need long range, because it would be launched from ground control against a specific target. It did not need sophisticated avionics, because a ground radar station would do the thinking. What it needed was thrust, lift, and the ability to survive the heat generated by extreme speed. The engines were Tumansky R-15 turbojets, enormous and thirsty, designed for one operating regime. The airframe was welded steel, because at Mach 3 the skin of an aircraft heats to temperatures that soften aluminum. The United States solved that problem with titanium on the SR-71 and paid an extraordinary price in cost and manufacturing complexity. The Soviet Union solved it with steel, which is heavier but vastly cheaper and easier to work. Western analysts call that primitive. It is more accurate to call it a different answer to the same physics problem, arrived at by an industry with different constraints. Steel was not a failure to achieve titanium. It was a decision. The vacuum tubes tell the same story. Western observers treated them as evidence of a backward electronics industry, and Soviet semiconductor manufacturing was genuinely behind. But vacuum tubes have one property that transistors of that era did not. They are extremely resistant to electromagnetic pulse. In an air defense system designed to keep functioning during a nuclear exchange, that is not a shortcoming. The radar those tubes powered was also enormously powerful, precisely because tube-based transmitters could handle raw output that solid-state components of the period could not. The same pattern holds across the whole airframe. The MiG-25 was heavy, thirsty, and had a modest turning ability. It was also astonishingly fast in a straight line, capable of climbing to 20,000 meters in a little over 3 minutes, and able to be built and maintained by an industrial base that did not have the resources of the American aerospace sector. Every apparent weakness was the shadow of a specific choice made to buy a specific strength. Soviet pilots were, in fact, discouraged from operating at the aircraft's maximum speed for extended periods. At Mach 3, the engines ran at temperatures that wore critical components down rapidly, and pushing that limit could destroy them. The aircraft's service top speed in normal operation was around Mach 283. The absolute figures existed, but they came at a cost, and everyone in the program knew it. Now, before we get into the flight that set the record, if you are enjoying this deep dive into Cold War aviation engineering, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps this channel keep making these. On August 31st, 1977, at Podmoskovnoye near Moscow, a specially prepared development aircraft designated E-266M took off. It was a MiG-25 airframe, a converted reconnaissance bomber variant re-engined with more powerful R-15 Bf-2 engines, stripped of everything that was not needed for the attempt. At the controls was Alexander Vasilievich Fedotov, chief test pilot of the Mikoyan Design Bureau. Fedotov was born in Stalingrad in 1932, became a test pilot in 1958, and by 1977 had flown virtually the entire MiG line, from the MiG-19 through the MiG-29 and MiG-31. He was the first Soviet test pilot to reach Mach 3. He had already been made a hero of the Soviet Union in 1966. Over his career, he set 15 world aviation records. The flight profile was not a climb in the way most people imagine a climb. No jet can hold level flight at extreme altitude because the air becomes too thin for wings to generate lift or engines to generate thrust. What Fedotov flew was a zoom climb. He accelerated to very high supersonic speed in the denser air of the lower atmosphere, converting fuel into kinetic energy, and then pulled the nose up and traded that speed for height, coasting upward on momentum like a stone thrown at the sky. Near the top of the arc, the engines were starved of usable air. The flight controls, which depend on airflow over the surfaces, went soft and unresponsive. The aircraft was no longer flying in any meaningful sense. It was a ballistic object with a man inside it, arcing through the top of its trajectory before falling back into the atmosphere. At the apex, the barometric instruments recorded 37,650 meters. That is 123,523 feet, more than 23 miles above the surface of the Earth, in a region where the sky overhead is black and the curvature of the planet is unmistakable. The Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, the world body that ratifies aviation records, certified it as a world record in Class C for powered airplanes, meaning aircraft that take off under their own power. Guinness World Records lists the same figure as the official absolute altitude record. It has never been beaten. Not by an American aircraft, not by a European one, not by anything built since. Nearly half a century later, the highest an air-breathing aircraft has ever flown under its own power remains a Soviet flight in a machine Western analysts had called crude 12 months earlier. Fedotov did not live to see how long his record would stand. On April 4, 1984, he was killed testing a MiG-31, the aircraft that succeeded the MiG-25, when it entered a spin from which it did not recover. He was buried in Zhukovsky, near Moscow. He had been made a Major General of Aviation the year before. The record was not the only mark the MiG-25 family set. Aircraft in this line established world records for time to climb, sustained altitude and payload to altitude, several of which stood for decades. In total, 18 world aviation records were set on the E-1666 and MiG-25 airframes, 3 of them absolute. The reason no one has beaten the altitude record is worth thinking about carefully, because it is not simply that no one has tried hard enough. The MiG-25's record depended on a very specific combination: enormous installed thrust, an airframe that could tolerate the thermal and structural loads of high supersonic flight, low weight in stripped configuration, and, crucially, a national program willing to fund a flight whose only purpose was to set a number. The aircraft that could theoretically challenge it, the SR-71 family, was built for sustained cruise at altitude rather than a ballistic lunge, and its operators had little interest in record attempts for their own sake. Modern fighters are optimized for entirely different things: sensors, stealth, weapons integration, fuel efficiency, multi-role flexibility. Nobody builds a single-purpose high-altitude sprinter anymore because there is no longer a mission that requires one. The threat that created the MiG-25 evaporated. The XB-70 was cancelled. The SR-71 was retired. High-altitude reconnaissance moved to satellites and then to drones. The specific problem the MiG-25 was built to solve stopped existing, and with it went any reason to build a successor optimized for the same extreme. That is why the record survives. It is a monument to a design philosophy that no Air Force pursues anymore. The MiG-25's operational record was more mixed than its record book. Somewhere between roughly 1,100 and 190 were built. It served the Soviet Union and later Russia, and was exported to Algeria, Iraq, India, Libya, and Syria. India flew reconnaissance variants on high-altitude photographic runs into the 2000s. Combat use was limited because the aircraft was a high-speed specialist and not a fighter in the conventional sense. Most have now left frontline service. Its reputation in the West went through a full cycle. Before 1976, it was overestimated so badly that it helped justify the development of the F-15 Eagle, an aircraft designed in part to counter a threat that did not exist in the form intelligence believed. After Belenko's defection, it was underestimated just as badly, dismissed as a steel and vacuum tube antique. Both judgments missed the point. The MiG-25 was never a general-purpose fighter and was never intended to be. It was a specialized instrument built to do one thing at the outer limit of what physics permits. And inside that narrow envelope, it was extraordinary. September 1976, a runway in Hokkaido, and a defecting lieutenant hands the West its answer. Engineers open the panels and find steel where they expected titanium and vacuum tubes where they expected microelectronics, and the conclusion is written before the inspection is finished. Primitive, crude, a generation behind. 11 months later, the same design, stripped and re-engined and pointed at the sky over a Moscow suburb, climbed to 37,650 meters and stopped, briefly, at the edge of the atmosphere. No aircraft has been higher since, under its own power. Not one built by any nation, in any decade, with any technology. The record still belongs to a dead Soviet test pilot flying an aircraft the West had already written off, and it has now outlived the country that built it by more than 3 decades. That is not luck. That is what happens when an engineering culture stops asking how a problem is supposed to be solved and asks only whether the answer flies.